I think there's a really fundamental thing about human rights, and it's about how we relate to each other and how we take care of each other, how we want to be treated as human beings ourselves, what that involves. There's a long history, you're right, of human rights and of argument about them. And I think that much of that was settled in the aftermath of the Second World War with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and a view from political leaders of that time that what had happened was so terrible and should never happen again, and that the world needed to think about what the rights are, that if governments protected them, the world would not get into such difficulties and such horrors again.
President Obama, in his inaugural address, said, "As for our common defence, we reject as false the choice between our safety and our ideals." Now, it's very easy for us to say that and to point to violent abuses and say, this must never be allowed to happen. But are there really no circumstances under which, say, torture is justified?
I think there are absolutely no circumstances in which torture is justified. I quite often get asked the ticking bomb question. You know, there's a bomb ticking away, and if you just torture the person, then, you know, you'll find out where it is and you'll save everybody's lives. And, you know, it's an interesting question. But back in the real world, as opposed to the world of 24, then, you know, there has never been a state that has tortured once. Okay, so we have this one situation, if we torture, we can resolve it. They don't stop there. They carry on torturing. There has never in the history of the world been a government that tortured once. It's also the case that most confessions obtained under torture are made up. I talked this morning about the Tipton Three and young men who were held in Guantanamo, and one of them, after much abuse, confessed to being on the battlefields of Afghanistan with Osama bin Laden. And actually, MI6 were able to show that he'd been working in Dixon's in Tipton.
Talking about Guantanamo Bay, one of your organisation's most prominent activities is letter writing. And there are examples of people such as Mr. Binyam in Guantanamo Bay. He was never allowed to read the letters he was sent by the guard, which called it his fan mail. And that must happen quite a bit. So is there a sense in which you're wasting your time?
No, see, I mean, the interesting thing about Binyam Mohammed is that he did get some letters, and then the guards used holding those letters back as a means to punish him. So Binyam knew that there were people outside of Guantanamo writing to him, arguing for him, wanting to see justice done, and that is massively encouraging. I once met a Mexican man, General Gallardo, who had been imprisoned by the Mexican army because he'd been arguing for human rights within the army. He had a sentence of 30 years. He was released after 8 years, and he showed me 50,000 letters that Amnesty members had written, and that, he says, he was out after 8 years and not after 30 because of those letters. So we hear stories like that all the time.
And to what extent would you say that Amnesty is responsible for the current consensus, at least in the UK, that human rights do matter?
I think we're an important part of that. We in the UK have over 250,000 members. That's a lot more than any of the political parties have. We have real resonance, especially with young people, and a real appetite, I think, amongst young people for thinking about human rights as a means to navigate our way through difficult decisions. It doesn't provide all the answers, but it provides, I think, a framework for finding the answers to some fairly difficult questions.